Welcome to this Daniel segment 16. We're in chapter 11 still of Daniel. If you want to turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 11, and if you have a syllabus, we're actually on page 81. We're coming down to the end. Page 81, it'll say segment 15 in your syllabus, but that's what we'll be looking at tonight. And this is Daniel's final prophecy, part 2, the end time. And really, I think we're going to see tonight this is a continuation of the great conflict. And I actually believe, and I'll show this tonight, that the chapter 11 ends with the great conflict at the end of the age, the Battle of Armageddon. And we'll look at that. And I think that's how chapter 11 ends. So this all leads up, when God gave Daniel this revelation, which I think takes us right to the end of the end, and with the great conflict that's coming there. So we'll see how this comes out. It's pretty interesting. So Daniel chapter 11, where we left off last week, was a despicable person will arise. We went through the wars between the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and how this went back and forth. The kings of the north were always the Seleucids. The kings were either named Seleucus or they were named Antiochus. And then the kings of the south were the Ptolemies. And it was these conflict of these battles that went on. And then here in chapter 11, verse 21, is this despicable person that arises, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. King James Version says, rather than despicable person, it says a vile person. The English Standard Version says a contemptible person. So this is a bad person. A vile person, a contemptible person, a despicable person. The despicable person that arose historically was Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes. This is the same one that we saw in chapter 8 that was called the little horn. A king will arise, insolent, skilled in intrigue, it said in Daniel 8:23. Historically, he didn't come to the throne legitimately because it's strongly suspected that Antiochus IV murdered his older brother, Seleucus III, which in verse 20 that we looked at, this was those last kings that came before Antiochus. And it said in his, and that was most likely talking about Antiochus III, in his place one, Seleucus III, will arise, who will send an oppressor throughout the jewel of his kingdom. Yet within a few days, he, Seleucus III, will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. And it's believed that Antiochus murdered his older brother, and that's how he came to the throne, Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes. Apart from the murder of his older brother, Antiochus did not use terror to gain power. He used flattery, smooth promises, and intrigue. And this is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now, for the rest of chapter 11, all the way through verse 45, all the pronouns from this time on, he, his, him, all refer back to this one, this despicable person. There's no new kings. There's no new kings in succession, as there had been, then this one came and this one. This is the last king and his demise at the end of this chapter. Most commentaries teach that in verse 35, this king, this despicable person, changes from Antiochus IV at the time of the Maccabees to the end time beast, to the end time little horn. Some suggest the change occurs in verse 40. I think perhaps what you have here is a dual prophecy. And I think many of the attributes of Antiochus IV, not all the attributes, but I think you will see that some of the attributes that can clearly be seen in Antiochus 4 are a type for a future man of perdition, because then it goes on to things that Antiochus 4 really didn't do, but it's for one that's in the future. And so you have this parallel. And I think in prophecy, I think it's important, not everything transfers symbolically. You some things transfer into understanding the future, but not every detail does. And I think you have that in this type for a future beast. And this is this lawless one. We don't know who this is yet, but he's coming. 2 Thessalonians says he will be revealed in the appointed time. He will come. Is he in the earth today? Very well could be. Who is it? I don't know. But this one will be coming. And tonight we're going to look at the details about this despicable person and how it relates to Antiochus 4 of the past and a future beast yet to come at the end of the age. So here's verses 21 through 28. I've highlighted all the terms, all the pronouns that refer back to this despicable person. I've highlighted them in red. And it says in verse 21, in his place, a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Now, this happened with Antiochus. It very well could be the way it's going to happen in the end times also. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception. Now, this was true with Antiochus, and it sounds, as we saw in Daniel chapter 9, this prince that is to come is going to make a covenant with the people of God, with the city of Jerusalem. So it's very well that this is a dual prophecy here. An alliance is made with him, and he will practice deception. And he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest parts of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his strength and courage against the kings of south with a large army. So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice foods and destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. As for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to one another at the same table. Kind of sounds to me like politicians today, but I think this happened with Antiochus back then. I think it will very well happen in the future, that there will be lies spoken at the same table, but it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set up against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. Verse 29, at the appointed time, he will return and come into the south, but his last time it will not turn out the way it did before. For the ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. Yet they will fall by sword and by flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days. I know this is talking about, it could very well talk about Antiochus Epiphanes, but I think this definitely is going to be something for us to take hold of, should we be here at the end times, that we would be those people that display strength and take action, as did the Maccabees. I'm not going to read the book of Maccabees tonight, but I definitely would recommend in your appendices, I put in there the under the Apocryphal writings, the first 4 chapters of the book of Maccabees, which covers this whole time with Antiochus and how the Jewish people of Matthias and then Judas the Hammer, Judas the Maccabees, and during that time of that 3.5-year period after the abomination of desolation, of what they did, how they were strong and took action. I think it's a good idea for us, those who know the truth. And I also like what it says here, that those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. And I've thought about my own, well, what is it that we should be doing? I think we need to provide understanding. As the world will be caught in deception, those of us who know the truth, I think it's going to be our job to teach, to give understanding to the many, whether they want to listen or not. I think there's going to be a lot that won't listen, but I think we are supposed to speak and give understanding if these are the times that will be coming, just like the Maccabees did at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So I definitely recommend reading the book of Maccabees this week, at least those first 4 chapters. The book of Maccabees it's like 12 chapters or 16, but the first 4 are the ones that deal with this time period. So last week I mentioned this enduring word commentary, and he has this commentary here about Antiochus Epiphanes. I thought I'd read and then we'll continue on. Antiochus Epiphanes carried on the feud between the dynasties, but pretended friendship and alliance to catch them off guard. Despite massive efforts and epic battles, Antiochus Epiphanes did not stand and his army was swept away. At his second campaign against Egypt, he was defeated with the help of Rome. In a famous battle, the Roman navy defeated the navy of Antiochus Epiphanes. After the battle, a Roman general drew a circle around Antiochus in the dirt and demanded to know if he would surrender and pay tribute to Rome, and demanded to know before he stepped out of the circle. From that point on, there was no doubt Antiochus Epiphanes took his orders from Rome and was under Roman dominion. After his bitter defeat from Egypt and Rome, Antiochus Epiphanes vented his anger against Jerusalem. Jerusalem was already shaken because Antiochus sold the office of the high priest and persecuted the Jewish people to conform to Greek culture, forsaking the faith and traditions of their fathers. He sent letters to Jerusalem to forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice. He returned home with only great plunder to soothe his wounded pride. Antiochus Epiphanes then set up an image of Zeus at the temple altar. He demanded sacrifice to this image and later desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig on it. This was in truth an abomination which brought a desolate condition to the temple. When Antiochus Epiphanes turned on Jerusalem, the Jewish people were divided. Some Jews forsook their covenant with God and embraced Greek culture. Those who knew their God made a stand for righteousness in the face of incredible persecution. In his attack on Jerusalem, Antiochus IV is said to have killed 80,000 Jews, taken 40,000 more as prisoners, and sold another 40,000 as slaves. So that's what happened with Antiochus. I also believe that in the end times, if what I suspect is going to happen at Jerusalem, I think the same thing will happen. You will have secular Judaism who will forsake truth, forsake what is right, and follow after what Revelation calls sexual immorality, the ways of the world, covetousness. And then you will have, I believe, true Jews who will take a stand for the God and perhaps even turn to the Messiah right at the end of the age. And I think this is what's going to happen. And I think you see a type of it there at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So again, I highly recommend that you read those first 4 chapters of the book of Maccabees in the upcoming week. So let's go on. And now I think right around here, we're moving away from Antiochus. I think that those verses, I think there's a dual understanding that we can get. But now I think we are moving towards an end time beast who, looking over the scope of things with God's wisdom as he moves right from there. We have all the mystery that's of the Messiah and what would happen with Jesus Christ all happen here. But we're jumping to the end here. Now, when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. We know in the future, according to Thessalonians, many will be deceived at the end times. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Then the king, this despicable person, will do as he pleases. And he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. Sounds like what it said in Thessalonians, that this one will sit in the temple as being God himself. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished. For that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the God of his fathers, which is why some have concluded from that statement that this could be someone of the Jewish faith. I don't know, but I think that very well could be. Or for the desire of women. Again, I read different things on this. Some think this could be talking about that he will be a transvestite, he will be a homosexual, he will be, or it could just mean that I think he just mean he doesn't care. That just has no bearing on him. He's into himself and he just doesn't care about women. Some have think that it means he's that the desire of women is actually talking about Jesus Christ, that Jesus was the desire of women. So I don't know how you take it, but whatever, this one that's coming is not going to have concerned about that, nor will he show regard for any other God, for he will magnify himself above them all. But instead, he will honor a God of fortress, a God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, treasures. So covetousness, money, is going to be a big deal. People are going to prosper who fall in line with this one. He will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out a land for a price. In this kingdom of this despicable one to come, if you want to make it, you got to acknowledge him. You need to say, "Hey, you're the man. You are the one." And if you can't speak bad against him, you got to be right on his team. And if you do, then he's gonna take care of you. You scratch my back, I'll take care of you. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? The way politicians can be. So for those who acknowledge him, and will cause to rule over many, and will parcel out land for a price. So it's also they'll get property at the end time. Now we're getting to the end of the end. The king of the south will collide with him, and the king of And the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land. And many countries will fall. But these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape, but he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. That's the end of this despicable one. Chapter 12, if you remember, now says, and at that time, Michael the archangel is going to rise up. The dead are going to be raised during this time. So we're in the end time here. Here in chapter 21, there's a few lines that have, end times terminology. For the end is still to come at the appointed time, it said in this verse. And here in like verse 35, it says, until the end time, because it is still to come at an appointed time. So this is all leading to this appointed time of the end. And it jumps from Antiochus Epiphanes to this end times despicable person. Now, who is the king of the north, or who are these rumors of the north, and what's happening here in the south in this continuation? Is this a continuation of the feud of early in this chapter? Or is this king of the north a king from the Seleucid Empire? Or is there a change here in verse 40? Is there something different happening here with the different kings that come in? And so I put down different versions here to kind of get an idea of what this is saying. And I'll just read these different versions just to give you a little flavor of different ways these different versions translate this. At the time of the end, so this is what we're talking about, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he will come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these will be delivered out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the main parts of the Ammonites. Just to give you a reference of modern countries, Edom, Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites today is the country of Jordan. Just to give you a perspective of geography. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver, and the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. He shall come to his end with none to help him. This is from the New English translation. At the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry, with a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. He'll extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and silver, and all the riches of Egypt and the Libyans and the Cushites in submission. But reports from the east and the north will alarm him, and he will go out in a great rage to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch his royal tents between the seas at the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. And the Message Bible, it's fun to read the Message Bible. In the final wrap-up of this story, the king of the south will confront him, but the king of the north will come at him like a tornado, unleashing chariots and horses and an armada of ships. He will blow anything away in his path. As he enters the beautiful land, people will fall before him like dominoes. Only Edom, Moab, and a few Ammonites will escape. As he reaches out, grabbing country after country, not even Egypt will be exempt. He will confiscate the treasures of Egyptian gold and silver and other valuables. The Libyans and Ethiopians will fall in with him. Then disturbing reports will come in from the north, and the east will throw him into a panic. Towering in rage, he will rush to stamp out the threat, but he will no sooner have pitched camp between the Mediterranean Sea and the Holy Mountain, all those royal tents, that he will meet his end, and not a soul around who can help. So, gives you a different idea from these different translations, this final conflict on the earth that will take place. If those 10 nation kingdoms that we saw in chapter 2 and we saw in chapter 7, if these are the Arab nations, it sounds like there's a conflict that goes on. It very well could be, remember it talked about that he will subdue 3 kings under him. Maybe the Libyans, the Ethiopians, and the Egyptians are the 3 kings that he subdues in that prophecy of Daniel chapter 10. I'm not sure, but just put that out there. I think that would fit with the 10 kingdoms, 3 of them being subdued by the one. Makes sense to me that this happens. And then it says that suddenly there's news from the north and the east. So he's kind of conquered the south and brought them along, but now he's got armies from the north and from the east coming into him, and then he goes out to camp between the seas and the holy mountain, and that's where he meets his end. And there's no one that can help him, because that's where the end will happen. So I really think the answer we find in other places in Scripture. Whatever conflict is being described here at the end of this chapter, it is the last conflict in this age, before chapter 12, and this despicable person comes to his end. So Egypt, Libyans, and Ethiopians will follow on his heels. I think these could be the 3 that come in that he subdues from these southern Arab nations. But then he gets rumors from the east and the north. Well, who's north today? Russia, right? Who are some major? Who's east? China, Iran. You know, so to me, when I hear of these kind of alliances kind of forming with China and Russia, Iran, it gets my attention as to maybe this is how things are going to happen here towards the end time, where the east, you got these kings from the east, you got the coming down from the north, and then he's going to go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. And I believe this is the final battle. And the location, which we're going to look at, is this the Gog, the prince of Rosh in the book of Ezekiel, this king of the north? Is it the same as this king in Daniel chapter? Is this the battle of Armageddon in Revelation? And I'd like to take a look at this, because I think when you read all these together, you can kind of get a picture of what this final conflict that's being discussed here in Daniel. I think it could be what's talked about in Ezekiel. I think it could be what's being talked about in Revelation, what we call Armageddon. So let's take a look at this in a little more detail. First of all, for those of you that have been to Israel, a lot of times you will go to Megiddo. Megiddo is this high plateau that sits up here. It's in northern, it's kind of northern Israel, but you see how it's between the seas. I think the Holy Mountain is Jerusalem, and you could almost make a triangle, not quite a perfect triangle, but This could be this location that Daniel's talking about. He will pitch a tent between the royal pavilion, between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. This is where Megiddo is, and there's this huge plain of Jezreel that just spans for miles and miles and miles. And you could see all the armies of the world coming into this location in the beautiful land here in northern Israel, where this final battle could very well take place. Megiddo is a location. Har is the hill, or the hill of Megiddo. And Har Megiddo is Armageddon. Armageddon. And you're looking at there a picture, I guess it was done from a drone, of Armageddon, which oversees this valley of Jezreel here in northern Israel, which is between the seas and the holy mountain, where this final conflict, it's the final conflict of the world. And this is where it is going to take place. Now, to start to look at this, is Gog, the prince of Rosh, the one being talked about it with those rumors from the north that he has. So here's Ezekiel 38, 3 through 9. I actually listened to a little bit of the last session of the Ezekiel class. I went and looked at that in a while, but it's very eye-opening for me. Ezekiel 38, 3 through 9, it says, and say, thus says the Lord Yahweh, behold, I'm against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. Now, there is a Gog and Magog after the 1,000-year reign of Christ in Revelation chapter 20. However, the way this sets up here in Ezekiel, it sure sounds like this final king of the north that comes down into the land of Israel before Jesus Christ comes back, not after the millennial reign. And he says, Meshach and Tubal, most believe this is the area of Russia, Ukraine, that's where these areas are. And this prince of this area is called Gog. And here God says, I will turn you about. And this is about this invasion, this final invasion of the land of Israel at the end of the age. I will turn you about and put hooks in your jaws, and I will draw you out, and all your army, horses, horsemen, all of them splendidly attired, a great company with buckler and shield, all wielding swords. So what God says here is, I'm going to put hooks in your jaws. It's like he's like fishing. He's like, I'm going to draw you in. I'm going to lure you in. I'm going to lure you into this final conflict, Gog, and you're going to come down into the Holy Land. And look at it, lists these nations. Persia. Well, what's Persia? Persia is Iran today. Ethiopia and Put. Those were two of the ones mentioned in Daniel that he subdues, that they would try and turn on this one of this despicable person. Ethiopia put with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer with all its troops. Beth Togarmah from the remotest parts of the north with all its troops. Many peoples with you. So you got the kings of the north, you got Persia from the east, right? And I definitely wonder if it was our day and time, if China would be involved in that. It does say there in Revelation, it talks about there's one place where God dries up the Euphrates to make way for the kings of the east, it says. So God's got this, he's going to have this plan where these forces from the east and forces from the north will be coming into this land at the end of the age. And it says, be prepared and prepare yourself, you and all your companies that are assembled about you, and be on guard. After many days, you will be summoned. God's going to send out through however God does this, however God is going to put his influence whether he's basically just takes his hand. I almost like, it's like, does he take his hand off the hose and let the spiritual powers go crazy? Is kind of how I think these things happen, where the demons and the devil spirits of this world, God takes his hand away, and these come and they're summoned in the latter years. You will come into the land, and this is talking about Israel, that is restored from the sword. Those inhabitants have been gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste, but its people were brought out from the nations, and they are living securely, all of them. Wow. I know when I went to Israel with Bill and Marianne, one of the big things that I took away from, with so many Jewish people that we met there in Israel, like our guide was from South America. When we went to the settlement up north in Shiloh, the mayor of Shiloh was from Brooklyn, New York. And I met so many Jews who had made decision to move back into what today is Israel, the land of Israel. This has happened, that these people, Israelites, have moved from all the nations of the world in our day and time to the nation of Israel, which is what this verse says, that latter years they will come into the land that's been restored and gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel. And they're living securely right now, right? All of them. And it says here that this Gog is going to come, invasion from the north. You will go up and you will come like a storm. You will be like a cloud covering the land, you and all your troops, and many peoples with you. I think this very well could be the rumors that this despicable person hears of what's coming down from the north. This is one of the reasons I don't really think Russia and China alliance is going to be this 10 kingdom nation, because I think this is much more the Russia and Iran group here of these countries that come up against the beast and this kingdom at the end of the age. Ezekiel 38 then goes on in verse 15. You will come from your place out of the remotest parts of the north, you and many people with you, all of them riding on horses, a great assembly and a mighty army. You will come against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land. It shall come about in the last days, these are the last days of this age, that I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I am sacrificed before you through their eyes of God. I should also remind you, Ezekiel was prophesying this at the time of the book of Daniel, probably right around the time that Jehoiachin was taken into captivity, is about the time the temple was destroyed, is about the time that Ezekiel prophesied this, during the time of Daniel. So all this stuff, God is speaking to the prophets at this time in history of Ezekiel, Daniel. God was speaking about what's going to happen in the end. In Ezekiel 18:19, it says, in my zeal and in my blazing wrath, I declare on that day, there will surely be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. Verse 21, I will call for a sword against him on all my mountains, declares the Lord God. Every man's sword will be against his brother. There's going to be so much confusion. They're going to fight each other. This battle here at the end. Ezekiel 39, 2-5, and I will turn you around, drive you on, take you up from the remotest parts of the north and I will bring you against the mountains of Israel. I will strike your bow from your left hand and dash down your arrows from your right. You will fall. You're going to fall on the mountains of Israel. This kingdom from the north, these armies of this invasion from the north, they're going to find their end in the mountains of Israel. You and all your troops and the people who are with you. And then he says, I will give you, because you're going to be dead, I'm going to give you as food to every predatory bird and beast of the field, and you will fall on the open field. For it is I who have spoken it, declares the Lord Yahweh. Wow. God gives pretty good detail, but I'm going to show you some of these things, and then we're going to look at Revelation and just see how these things set up and they fit with what Daniel is talking about describing very briefly in the final conflict in Daniel chapter 11. He says in that time, when they all come and there's this invasion of Israel here in the land, he says on that day there's going to be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, right at the end of the age, at the time of this battle of Armageddon. And notice this too. After all these people are killed on the mountains of Israel and their dead bodies all over the place, he says, I'm going to give you as food to all the kinds of the predatory birds, all the, the eagles and all the birds, the owls and all the birds that eat flesh are going to have a supper here on feasting on these armies that all die here in the mountains of Israel. That's quite a descriptive. Revelation is just about as descriptive. Revelation chapter 16. And this, by the way, where we are in chapter 16, these are after the 7 trumpets. These are the last 2 vials. The vials in Revelation, it says in the vials is the wrath of God. God's final wrath on the world are in the vials, the 6th and the 7th vial. And that's what we're talking about. That's where we're at here in Revelation 16. Revelation 17 and 18 is kind of just a little, it's a little picture of Babylon, of the that final evil world influence that influences the world. It just gives you a view into Babylon. But here, chapter 16 is the end of this final wrath of God in this battle. And then chapter 19 picks back up with the end of this battle. Chapter 17 and 18 is kind of a parentheses in Revelation, talking about Babylon. So you can almost read from chapter 16 to chapter 19 to kind of get the flow of the final wrath of God. So here in Revelation 16, verse 12, it says, the 6th angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the river Euphrates, and its water was dried up. Oh, here's the verse I talked about. So that the way would be prepared for the kings of the east. So when the 6th vial is poured out, it's going to dry up the Euphrates River, because in order for the kings of Persia, or if China's involved, to come into the land of Israel, if they can get a land bridge for the Euphrates River, that would help the armies to cross and come in. And that's what God's going to do. He's going to dry up the river Euphrates so that these kings from the east can come in. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophets, these 3 unclean spirits like frogs, for they are spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole earth to gather them for war, for the great day of God, the Almighty. And they gathered them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Armageddon. It's a specific location that's there in northern Israel, between the seas and the holy mountain. This is where God, and here it says it's going to come out of the beast and the false prophet. I get the idea that this beast and this false prophet, they're going to be speaking things, and these nations of the world, they're not going to take it anymore, right? They're not going to take it anymore. And actually the demons are going to go forth and influence these nations from the north and from the east to come into the Holy Land, to invade Israel at the last days, to come up against this beast and his kingdom, and they're going to meet at Armageddon. And I think that's what Daniel's talking about. I think that's what Ezekiel's talking about. I think that's what Revelation is talking about. That they're all going to come, that they're all going to converge right here at the end of the age. The great conflict. Really, this is the great conflict. Then, look at this. The 7th angel poured out its bowl upon the air. This is the 7th. This is the final 7th vial of God's wrath. And a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder. And there was a great earthquake, such as had not been since man came on the earth. So great an earthquake was it, and so mighty. And that's what Ezekiel talked about. And can you see that all these nations are going to be coming to battle? They're going to be, have tanks and guns and military and this big battle, and all of a sudden in Israel is going to be this huge earthquake. It's going to shake some people up. God's final wrath, this earthquake, right at the end of the age, at the end of the battle of Armageddon, this great earthquake will occur. And then I say chapters 17 and 18 are kind of parenthetical, talking about Babylon, the city of Babylon, and why it's punished. And then it picks up in 19 with this final battle after they all die. And then in verse 17 of 19, it says, then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying, to all the birds which fly in mid-heaven, come, assemble for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings and the flesh of commanders and the flesh of mighty men and the flesh of horses and of those who sit on them and the flesh of all men, both free and slaves and small and great. The birds of the heaven are going to have a supper here in Israel. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. Somewhere in here, then, Jesus Christ is King of Kings, of Lord of Lords, and I believe we're with him. Those of us who have faith are raised from the dead. We are coming with him at this point. And the beast was seized, and him the false prophet who performed signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive in the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone, and the rest were killed with a sword, which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. So those who don't get killed by the battle of each other, they're going to be killed by the sword of Jesus, the sword of the Lord, here at the end of the age. And all the birds are going to be filled with their flesh. So there's a happy ending. There is this final conflict from the book of Daniel, from the book of Ezekiel, and from the book of Revelation, where at this end, these nations of the kings of the north and the east come up against this despicable person in the beautiful land between the seas and the holy mountain at Armageddon. And that's this final battle. And I believe that's the final conflict in this vision to Daniel. But when rumors of the east and from the north will disturb him, he goes forth with great wrath. So this battle to annihilate many, he will pitch his tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him. And that end is what we just read about in Revelation chapter 19. That ends chapter 11 of Daniel. But God's not finished with his vision for Daniel. Daniel then, at the end of the book of Daniel, is shown the hope at the end of this conflict. Because during this time, God's powers, God's angels, God's people, and God's host is going to be doing a work. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 through 4. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words, seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. And next time, to close out the book of Daniel, we're going to go to chapter 12 and look at the hope of the resurrection from the dead, and Daniel's hope for his own life. After this life he lived for these 80, 90 years, at the very end, God gives him hope of resurrection. Just unbelievable. But we'll look at that next time when we do the final session of Daniel. So come back next week. You don't want to miss next week. And then we'll also do a summation of all these prophecies in Daniel and kind of give an overview of all of the things and kind of put it all together and end the book of Daniel next week. So come back one more week. So for readings for review, Daniel chapter 11, 20 through 45 was our main section. We also read those last verses of Daniel 12, 1 through 4. I recommend you read all of Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39 about this final day invasion in the land of Israel. And then also Revelation chapter 16 and chapter 19 about the Battle of Armageddon and this final conflict on the earth and what happens. As I mentioned, I think for historically, I recommend reading the book of Maccabees, chapters 1 through 4, but especially I think look at the Maccabees themselves, Judas Maccabees, Matthias, and how they took a stand in the midst of that evil time, because I think there's encouragement for all of us in the book of Maccabees, and that's in Appendix 2, pages 47 through 60 in your appendices. And also then again, there's that website that I mentioned last week that gave that little bit of Antiochus during the Seleucid and the Ptolemy's wars. So that is Daniel, our segment 16, and we have one more segment to go, and we'll finish out the book of Daniel next time.